Before we indulge in the delights of this video, grant me a like, offer a subscription, tap that delicious hype button, and whisper in the comments which path of chaos calls to you the most. Don't be shy. Temptation touches all. Thanks, mortal.
Do you know what a soul sounds like when it cracks? I do. It's the 41st millennium, and I learned the answer in the most terrible way. I once believed music was my salvation, the purest expression of the human spirit in a galaxy of war and horror. Now I know it can be the instrument of damnation just as surely as any demon's blade. My fall from grace began with a single, forbidden note, one that echoed in my mind long after the sound itself died. I never imagined that a simple melody would lead me into the arms of darkness. Back then, I was a loyal son of the Imperium, a musician praised for his devotion and talent. Back then, I still prayed to the God Emperor and believed he listened. But the first time I heard true music, real, raw, unshackled music, I felt something inside me break and blossom all at once. In that moment, a new hunger awoke in me, and once a hunger like that is stirred, it never truly goes away. This is the story of how I traded the golden light of the Emperor for the purple shadows of Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure. It's a tale of devotion and obsession, of how a single spark of inspiration became an all-consuming fire. Listen carefully, and perhaps you'll hear the same subtle harmony that first seduced me. Perhaps you'll understand why I did what I did, and why, even now, a part of me cannot regret it. It began, as I said, with a single note. I grew up on a world called Gina Prime, a dreary gray hive world where the sun only ever reached the richest spire tops. Far below, in the smog and shadow, the rest of us lived out our dutiful lives. My family were devout imperial citizens, hard-working, pious, and poor as dust. We lived in Hive Ostia's lower hab blocks, where the shrines to the Emperor were more lavish than any home. From my earliest days, I remember the sound of hymns echoing in the metal corridors. "O Emperor, guide our voice," we sang. "Accept this, our humble praise." Those were the first words I ever learned to carry in a tune. Music was my world even before I knew what world meant. As a child, I sang in the local chapel's congregation choir. It was a grand, soaring place by our standards. Carved stone saints in alcoves, guttering candlelight, the scent of incense barely masking the stink of the hive. When we sang the Gloria in Excelsis Imperator, I could almost feel hope trickling down from the spire above. The priest said my voice was a gift from him on Terra himself. I believed it. Oh, how proud I was to serve by singing his praises. I poured my young heart into every sacred verse, sure that the God Emperor was smiling upon me. By adolescence, I had learned to play the great pipe organ that loomed over the altar. It was an ancient creaking thing, each key larger than my hand, the pedals stiff with centuries of dust. But to me, it was a gateway to heaven. When I pressed those keys and unleashed thunderous chords of the Imperial Creed, I felt connected to something greater. The congregation would close their eyes in rapture, voices lifted in unity. In those moments, even the grime of Hive Ostia seemed to wash away under waves of sound. I lived for those moments. Outside the chapel, life was harsh and joyless. Factory shifts that never seemed to end, endless queues for ration bars, the crack of the overseer's lash for the unlucky or unfaithful. In the darkness of the underhive, desperation and cruelty festered. But within that chapel's walls, at least for an hour on saints' days, I could conjure beauty. I could make people feel something other than fear or hunger. That knowledge sustained me through many bleak days. I remember old Cantor Matthias, the choir master, with fondness and a touch of sorrow. He taught me not just technique, but discipline. The Emperor values purity above all, he would say, gnarled finger wagging as I practiced scales across a battered harpsichord. Each note must be played with clarity and devotion. No embellishments, no deviations. Ours is to echo his glory, not our own vanity. I took those words to heart for a long time. I became a model student of the sacred music, rigid, flawless, and utterly predictable. Yet a small part of me always wondered. When my fingers itched to add a flourish or slip into a different melody, I'd quell the impulse with silent prayer. Still, the curiosity lingered like a half-remembered tune in the back of my mind. Sometimes, late at night, after curfew, when even the enforcers' patrols died down, I'd climb up to the dusty loft above the chapel where scraps of old instruments lay. There, I dared to experiment in secret. A plucked string here, a changed chord there. Quietly, furtively, I assembled notes that were not in any hymn book. One starless night, I recall, I improvised a tiny lullaby on a viol that was missing 2 strings. It was a simple, melancholy line of music, nothing like the triumphant marches we played on holy days. I didn't even notice the figure in the doorway until I had finished the last soft note. It was Sister Dominica, one of the adepta overseeing the chapel. I froze, certain I was about to be chastised for indulging my imagination. But the sister just stood there a moment, eyes glistening. "That was lovely," she whispered. "Whose composition is that?" My heart felt ready to burst with equal parts shame and pride. "It's just something I made up," I admitted, terrified. In the gloom, her face hardened instantly. The softness in her eyes turned to steel. "In the future, keep your talents focused on officially sanctioned pieces, child," Dominica said curtly. "Innovation for its own sake can be dangerous. Remember, all beauty flows from the Emperor. To seek other muses is to court heresy." Then she left, her praise and reproach swirling in my mind. Dangerous. The word echoed as I carefully set the vial down. I hadn't thought music could be dangerous. Music was harmony, peace. How could a sequence of sounds threaten the God Emperor's glory? I didn't understand then, but I obeyed out of fear. After that, I redoubled my efforts to toe the line. I burned the lullaby I'd scribbled on parchment in a candle flame, murmuring penance. For years, I wrote nothing original. I played only what was approved, the same ancient hymns, the same stirring anthems to the imperial truth. By the time I turned 20, I had gained some renown in our district as a gifted organist and cantor, but only within the confines allowed. People called me blessed. They said I brought them closer to the Emperor's light with each performance of the Litany of Duty or the Canticle of the Saints. At times, I believed them. During especially grand masses when hundreds of voices sang under my direction, I could almost taste divinity on my tongue, a sweetness like sacramental wine. Those were glimpses of genuine joy. I won't deny it. But like all ecstasy sanctioned by the ecclesiarchy, it was measured, controlled, doled out in safe portions. We were allowed to feel uplifted, but not too much, never too much. Always leave them wanting, as Matthias said, but wanting is dangerous. In my heart, I began to sense that cage of rules and doctrines tightening. Each Sunday, I'd play the same chord progressions, lead the same chants, and a thought would creep in. Is this all there is? The Emperor is infinite, his glory boundless, so why is our praise so rigid, so limited? The question itself felt blasphemous, and I scourged myself with extra prayers whenever it surfaced. I lived in fear that such thoughts were the whispers of the enemy in my ear. Little did I know how prophetic that fear would become. Yet, Outwardly, I remained the dutiful musician. Perhaps my piety and skill would have carried me on like that all my life, safe, respected, and unfulfilled, if not for a chance encounter that changed everything. The day I met the nobleman was the day the first crack formed in my soul's harmony. It happened after a particularly grand service held to celebrate the local governor's jubilee. I had been chosen to lead the hymn for the occasion, a rare honor for someone of my low birth. The governor himself attended in the front pew, flanked by flunkies in gilded uniforms and perfumed courtiers fluttering fans. I remember how small I felt as I took my place at the organ that day, the eyes of high-born strangers on my back. But when I began to play, all that insecurity melted into the music. I played as if the emperor himself were listening. The old organ bellowed forth sound like never before. Our choir's voices soared to the vaults. Ave Imperator, we chanted, Deus et Dominus Humanitas. The congregation, nobles and laborers alike, erupted in an amen that rattled the chandeliers. After the service ended, I was descending from the organ loft, still trembling with adrenaline and reverence, when a finely gloved hand caught my elbow. Startled, I turned to find a tall man in an ornate purple long coat smiling at me. He was perhaps in his 50s, face lined but gracefully so, with keen gray eyes. I recognized him at once. Lord Sirius Langren, a minor cousin of the governor, known patron of the arts in our spire. What was he doing in our modest chapel, and why was he stooping to speak to me? "Magnificent performance, young man," Lord Sirius said, voice smooth as polished ivory. "Truly stirring. You have a gift." My throat went dry. I stammered out thanks and a dutiful remark about the emperor guiding my hands. Sirius smiled wider. "Of course. Still, talent must be nurtured. Tell me, do you perform outside of ecclesiastic functions?" I blinked. "No, my lord. My music is devoted to the god emperor's worship alone." He chuckled softly, as if at a private joke. "Ah, the church is lucky to have you, but there are other venues in need of such splendor. I host small cultural gatherings at my manse now and then, salons for aficionados of fine music. I would be honored if you would perform for us one evening." I must have looked like a fool, opening and closing my mouth in shock. An invitation to a noble's mansion? My immediate thought was to refuse. Surely it wasn't appropriate. But he sensed my hesitation and pressed a calling card into my hand. It was embossed with a crest of twin masks, one smiling, one weeping. "Think on it," Sirius said. "Our next soiree is in a week's time. I wager our guests have never heard anything quite like what you can provide." With a last genial nod, he swept away to join his retinue, leaving me dumbfounded. I stared at that card in my palm as if it were a live grenade. No noble had ever sought me out personally. A part of me swelled with pride, recognition, at last, beyond the chapel's walls. But another part, the dutiful choir boy, quailed. I recalled Sister Dominica's warning. Innovation can be dangerous. What did I truly know of this Lord Sirius? The twin mask crest was unfamiliar, faintly unsettling. Yet excitement fluttered in my chest. This was an opportunity, perhaps the only one I'd ever get, to share my music with the highborn, to see a world beyond the lower hive. I decided to consult Cantor Matthias. Surely he would have wise counsel. That evening I approached him in the rectory library, where he was cataloging old hymnals. I recounted what had happened, half expecting him to forbid it outright. He gave me a long, measured look. "Lord Sirius, you say," he muttered, tugging at his gray beard. "I have heard of him. A dilettante and a gourmand, but not known as a blasphemer as far as I recall." Matthias tapped the card with one liver-spotted finger. The ecclesiarchy allows secular performances so long as they don't conflict with duties or stray into the profane. Technically, you could accept. Relief and anticipation flooded me, but Matthias's frown kept my excitement in check. "Just remember who you are, lad," he cautioned. "You bring the Emperor's light wherever you go. Do nothing to dim it. The nobility can be—" He paused, searching for a polite word. "Corrupting, if you aren't careful." I assured him I would be on my best behavior and that my faith was steadfast. In truth, I was already fantasizing about what the salon might be like. Fine wine, elegant conversation, maybe even some new musical repertoire beyond our dusty hymnals. I was confident I could navigate one evening among the nobility without losing my soul. After all, I had resisted temptation this long, hadn't I? A little voice in my head whispered that this might finally be my chance to play something of my own composition, just a harmless little piece to impress them. I pushed that thought aside for the moment and focused on practicalities. What to wear? I owned nothing but choir robes and a threadbare suit. What piece to perform? Perhaps a classical Terran sonata, safe but impressive. The night of the salon arrived faster than I expected. A gilt carriage, yes, an actual carriage drawn by clattering servo-automata, came to convey me from the chapel to the spire. I gazed out the small window as we ascended on grav lifts past levels of the hive I'd only seen from afar. Neon signs and spotlights, sky bridges between glittering towers, gardens on balconies with real green plants. I drank in the sights with wonder. For once, I did not recite the litany of humility. I wanted, just for a night, to enjoy this rarefied air without guilt. Lord Sirius's mansion sat near the spire's peak, an opulent manor of marble and stained glass amidst sculpted topiaries. Servo skulls bearing candles flitted about like fireflies, illuminating a path through a manicured courtyard. I was greeted at the door by a major domo servitor with a porcelain mask and velvet livery. It bowed with mechanical precision and led me inside, my scuffed shoes sinking into carpets softer than any bed I'd known. The air was thick with aromatic incense, far sweeter than the musty camphor of our chapel, jasmine and something else that made my head swim pleasantly. We passed through halls adorned with paintings and statuary lit by golden lumen globes. I caught glimpses of artwork that made me linger. A canvas of a heroic Primarch in battle here, but next to it, an image of a reclining nude figure that made me blush and quickly avert my eyes. Marble busts of imperial heroes stood alongside abstract sculptures that twisted in almost suggestive shapes. The mix of piety and worldliness was confusing, even disorienting. Was this normal in a noble's home? Matthias's caution echoed in my mind, but I pushed it aside. At last we entered the music room, and I felt my breath catch. It was a lavish salon with high arched windows overlooking the hive lights below, draped in purple silks. A semicircle of plush chairs and lounges faced a small stage where various instruments were arranged. Some I recognized, like a pianoforte and a violoncello, and others that were utterly foreign in design. There was even a harp-like contraption of crystal that seemed to emit a faint hum on its own. A dozen or so guests milled about, clad in fashions that ranged from elegant to eccentric. Feathered hats, embroidered coats, faces painted with cosmetics in daring hues. Their laughter was soft and languid, their posture reclined and at ease. It was a tableau of sophistication I had never seen except in hololithic images. Lord Sirius broke from a conversation and hurried over as I entered. "Our maestro has arrived," he announced jovially, and I suddenly found myself the center of attention. The guests offered polite applause as he guided me to the stage. Introductions were made. A lady this, a magistrate that. Names and titles swirled past me. I managed to bow and tried to keep my voice steady. Sirius spared me further social rigors by suggesting I begin playing while everyone refreshed their drinks. I sat at the pianoforte, an exquisite piece crafted from rare mahogany and brass. My fingers rested on the keys, and for a moment I was paralyzed. What should I play? The dignified sonata I'd rehearsed? Or something of my own? The expectant hush of the salon awaited. In that pause, I felt again the weight of Sirius's compliment. You have a gift, and Matthias's caution. Do nothing to dim the Emperor's light. I began with the safe choice, a stately, traditional piece, letting my fingers find comfort in familiar patterns. The melody filled the room, refined and controlled. The guests resumed murmured conversations, sipping a Masek as I provided agreeable background ambiance. It was all going smoothly, but as I neared the end of the piece, I caught sight of one guest, a woman in a peacock-feathered shawl, stifling a yawn. Others were polite, but clearly not enraptured. These nobles had doubtless heard countless such performances. Safe was boring them. Something rebellious flared in me. Without thinking, I transitioned the final notes into an impromptu flourish, then seamlessly into another tune, one of my own invention, a lilting melody that had long lived only in my head. At first, no one seemed to notice the shift. The tune started soft, gentle as a lullaby, then built subtly in complexity. My confidence grew when I realized no censure came. In fact, the room grew quieter. Heads turned toward me. Conversations died down. They were listening, truly listening. I played on, emboldened. The melody danced and swelled, warm and bittersweet. It spoke of longing, of a caged bird dreaming of open skies, perhaps a reflection of my own soul. I poured everything into it that I'd kept restrained for years. Each note that would have earned a frown from Sister Dominica, I gave wings here. For the first time outside my dreams, I was sharing my music, and they loved it. I could see it in their faces, eyes widened, smiles curling. One man had closed his eyes, swaying slightly as if drunk on the sound. When I finished, the last note hanging crystalline in the perfumed air, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then an eruption of applause, genuine, enthusiastic applause that I had never heard directed at me before. My cheeks flushed hot. I murmured a shaky thanks to the Emperor under my breath for not striking me down on the spot for my audacity. If this was sin, then I confess it felt wonderful. Lord Sirius approached, clapping loudly. "Marvelous! Exquisite!" he proclaimed. "I knew you would amaze my boy." Glasses of wine were pressed into my hands before I even rose from the bench. "To the virtuoso!" someone toasted, and a cheer went up. I was swept off the stage and gently guided toward a cluster of couches. A lady with glittering cybernetic eyes took my arm to steady me, smiling as if we were old friends. My heart was pounding, the praise washing over me like a warm tide. So this was the adulation of the highborn? I could hardly believe it. They peppered me with questions. What was that piece? Where did you study? I confessed it was just a little something of my own. This caused a delighted stir. "Original, truly. How refreshing," said a man with a gold silk turban. "You must share the sheet music with us." I sheepishly admitted I'd never written it down, and the astonishment only grew. A noblewoman with elaborate face paint touched my shoulder and murmured, "Such raw talent, and humble, too." I was anything but humble in that moment. I was basking shamelessly. Someone pressed a crystal flute of Amasek into my hand. I had scarcely tasted alcohol before, only the weak sacramental wine at Mass. But I sipped the Amasek to be polite. Sweetness with a spiced bite flooded my tongue. A warmth bloomed in my chest. I sipped again, more deeply. Laughter rang around me. They were genuinely enjoying my company, treating me as one of their own for this night. I knew I should be cautious, but the combination of wine and flattery was dizzying. "Come, maestro," purred the lady with cyber eyes. I think her name was Celine. "We must introduce you to real music. You'll appreciate this." She led me by the arm to a phonograph device in the corner. With a mischievous smile, Celine produced a lacquered record from a velvet case. The others nearby exchanged anticipatory grins. As the needle dropped, a strange music crackled to life. It was unlike any imperial hymnal or classical piece I knew. The rhythm was sultry and irregular, the melody weaving in scales I couldn't place, at times achingly slow, then feverishly fast. Instruments keened and thundered in alien harmony. There were vocals too, wordless sighs and gasps that interlaced the instrumentation. It was disorienting and mesmerizing all at once. My first instinct was to analyze the structure, but it defied expectation at every turn. "It's a rare composition from the Eastern Fringe," Celine whispered to me, leaning in. Her breath tickled my ear. "They call it the Symphony of the Abyss. Exquisite, isn't it?" Exquisite? I wasn't sure what I felt. Some passages were so beautiful I wanted to weep. Others grated like shattered glass against my mind. There was a darkness under the music's beauty, a kind of seduction that felt dangerous. My earlier unease stirred, but the amasek and the closeness of Celine's hand on mine dulled my caution. "It's certainly unique," I managed to reply over the music. Lord Sirius joined us, nodding along to the uncanny tune. "We have a small club, you see," he explained, gesturing around at the guests. "We seek out experiences beyond the mundane. The Imperium's culture can be so stifling, don't you agree? Always the same dogma on repeat. Here, in our circle, we savor the novel, the provocative, the beautiful in all its forms." He smiled benevolently at me. "Tonight, you were our novelty, young man, and you did not disappoint. But there is so much more to explore." His words resonated in me, stifling. Yes, that was exactly the word for my life until now. I felt a kinship suddenly with these people. Heretics or not, and surely they weren't heretics, just patrons of art, I told myself. They understood something fundamental. The human soul craves more than rote prayer and duty. It thirsts for beauty, however unconventional. The record continued its strange journey through sound. At one point, a low thrumming built up, a bass so deep I felt it in my bones. The lights in the room seemed to dim, or perhaps my vision did. My heartbeats synced to the pulse of that bass. I closed my eyes a moment and swore I sensed a whisper just beyond hearing, a harmony hidden beneath the layers of song. It might have been a woman's voice, or many voices, sighing in pleasure or pain, or both. The hair on my arms rose. When I opened my eyes, I noticed several guests had a faraway look as well. One man was gently weeping, a smile on his face. Lady Celine's cybernetic eyes were fluttering as if overwhelmed by input. Whatever this music was, it had a power to move people deeply. It certainly moved me. When the final note faded, there was a collective exhale among us, as if we'd all been holding our breath. I realized my hands were trembling. I felt unmoored, excited, inspired, but also slightly afraid. I grasped for something safe to say. "Remarkable piece. I've never heard its like," I murmured. My voice sounded thick in my own ears. Sirius gently shut off the phonograph and laid a hand on my shoulder. "I suspect you will be hearing much more if you're willing." His tone was jovial, but something in his eyes was sharp, appraising. "You see, our little club gathers often. We would love to have you as a regular guest and performer if you're amenable. There are many pieces we could show you, and I suspect many you could show us. The pursuit of art is a noble endeavor, wouldn't you agree?" I found myself nodding. A part of me, the rational part, noted how carefully he phrased it as a pursuit of art. Not pleasure, not heresy. Art. How could art be wrong? Even the Imperial Creed extols the beauty of creation, doesn't it? I was exhilarated by the idea of returning, of sharing more nights like this. Already my mind was buzzing with new melodic ideas inspired by the symphony of the abyss. I am honored, I replied. I will do my best to contribute. That answer seemed to please Sirius greatly. The rest of the evening passed in a warm haze. They feted me like a new darling of the salon. We discussed music long into the night. I felt like a starving man who had been invited to a banquet. Every insight, every novel theory or interpretation they offered was nourishment I had been denied. We spoke of ancient Terran composers, of Zeno's instruments rumored in distant markets, of the emotional mathematics of harmony. Some ideas were radical, even blasphemous by strict imperial standards. A suggestion that certain rhythms could influence a listener's soul, for instance. But wrapped in velvet words and intellectual musing, it all seemed so harmless. When the night wound down, Lord Sirius personally saw me to the door. "We'll send for you again soon, never fear," he said, clasping my hand. "Your presence tonight was like a breath of fresh air in a tomb. Continue to nurture that spark, yes? The spark of creativity and desire. Don't let it be smothered by those who fear the flame." There was an earnestness in his voice that struck me. In that moment, he felt less like a lofty noble and more like a mentor. As I stepped into the returning carriage with a spinning head and full heart, I could not help but recall Cantor Matthias's warning. The nobility can be corrupting. I looked down at my hands, still faintly shaking from excitement. Had I been corrupted tonight? No, I told myself firmly. I had merely played music, beautiful music that harmed no one. If experiencing a wider palette of art was corruption, then perhaps the Imperium needed more of it, not less. I smiled at the thought. It felt almost revolutionary. Through the carriage window, I watched the lights of the upper hive recede as we descended back into the smoggy layers of the lower city. I should have been exhausted, but instead I was brimming with energy, my mind replaying the evening's sounds and sensations. The plush seat under me, the lingering taste of amasec on my lips, the memory of applause in my ears. It was intoxicating. Returning to my drab quarters and the austere life of the chapel felt unreal, like stepping out of a vivid dream into a colorless morning. That night I hardly slept. When I closed my eyes, I saw swirling colors and heard snatches of that alien symphony. Once I woke in the dark, convinced I heard a soft laugh in my tiny room. A woman's laugh, equal parts seductive and cruel. I held my breath, heart hammering, but the sound was gone, if it had ever been there. Probably just the echo of a memory, I told myself. Still, a prickling sensation danced on my skin in the silence, as if unseen eyes watched me from the corner. Eventually, I drifted into a fitful sleep with a strange excitement coiled in my belly. In the span of one evening, my world had widened. The cage bars I'd once felt now seemed farther apart. I tasted something forbidden yet undeniably sweet, and it left me craving more. The weeks that followed were the brightest of my life, and in hindsight, the beginning of the end of it. True to his word, Lord Sirius sent for me again and again. I became a fixture at his clandestine salons, sneaking away from my chapel duties whenever the summons came in the form of a discreet envelope or a coded Vox message. I learned to craft excuses. An ailing relative in a neighboring district, additional practice on the organ at odd hours. These lies came uneasily at first, knotting my stomach with guilt. But each time I stepped into Sirius's world of music and luxury, The guilt melted like frost under a rising sun. The gatherings at the manse grew more daring with each session, or perhaps my eyes simply opened wider to what had been there all along. At first, it was simply more exotic music and cultured debate, but later the salons introduced me to increasingly decadent experiences. I performed twice more on the pianoforte, and even on that curious crystal harp, which produced ethereal chiming notes unlike anything I'd played. My original compositions multiplied as I was inspired by the strange new pieces I encountered. The others encouraged me greedily. Lady Celine, in particular, became something of a patron to me. She would slip me folios of obscure music to study, compositions said to be recovered from distant worlds or lost archives. I remember a parchment of bizarre musical notation she lent me, claiming it was transcribed from the harmony of an alien mind. I couldn't make sense of it at first. The scales were all wrong, dissonant. But after hearing more of those fringe symphonies, I began to perceive patterns and experimented with them. I also found myself increasingly drawn into the social pleasures of the group. After playing, I no longer sat alone or just talked art. I drank their expensive wines with gusto. I laughed at their risque jokes. One night, I even danced with Celine in the middle of Sirius's marble foyer, half drunk on a fizzy golden liquor that made everything hilariously funny. Me, dancing. It was clumsy, and I nearly tripped over my own feet, but the peals of laughter from our audience only egged me on. That was the first time I felt truly free. Ridiculous, yes, but free of care in a way I'd never known inside the Dower Chapel. But with each little freedom came a new boldness, and soon transgressions that once would have terrified me began to feel normal. A month after my first performance at the Salon, Sirius introduced a new element to the evening, a taste of an off-world drug called joy wine. It was served openly in ornate glass vials. Joy wine looked like liquid mother-of-pearl and smelled of roses and something muskier. I hesitated when it was offered to me. Narcotics were absolutely forbidden to imperial clergy, and by training I was almost an honorary lay cleric. But then Celine teased, "Our genius is afraid his muse might bite?" That stung my pride. I had faced the unknown sounds of the abyss. Why balk at a mere cordial meant to enhance pleasure? I tipped back the vial. The effect was subtle at first, a gentle cooling sensation in my veins, a sharpening of colors around me. I remember gasping at how vibrant Celine's peacock shawl suddenly looked, each filament of feather distinct. The music playing on the phonograph, a lively percussive piece from some far colony, slowed in my perception, each beat throbbing through me, and the feel of the air. The air felt like silk caressing my skin. I recall shivering with delight at the simple brush of my shirt against my arm. Joy wine lived up to its name. My body felt alive in ways I couldn't articulate, every sense enhanced. It was as if I'd been half deaf and half numb all my life until that moment. With my heightened senses, the music and conversation took on new dimensions. I heard harmonies buried in the background of songs I thought I knew. I noticed micro-expressions of delight or intrigue on the faces around me. When one of the gentlemen recited a risque sonnet to amuse the others, I swear I could see the rich timbre of his voice as colored smoke drifting through the air. I clapped with genuine glee, along with everyone at the poem's scandalous climax. Something about a saint's daughter and a very unsaintly act that left me both blushing and chuckling. Normally, I might have felt horrified at such sacrilege, but under the influence of joy wine, it just seemed delightfully cheeky. That night, I stumbled home to my quarters in the small hours, euphoric and brimming with creative fire. I penned an entire composition in one sitting, a sonata for organ that attempted to capture the swirling euphoria of that drug-laced dance. The notes spilled from my quill in silver arcs and staccato bursts. When I finished and looked it over, I didn't even recognize parts of it as my own work. Bold, syncopated rhythms, unexpected key changes. I had never dared write something so unorthodox. A pang of fear struck me then. If Cantor Matthias or anyone from the chapel saw this sheet, they would brand it madness at best, heresy at worst. My old reflexes kicked in, and I nearly set it to flame as I had done with my childhood lullaby. But this time I couldn't. This music was beautiful in its strange way. I felt it with every fiber of my being. I carefully hid the pages behind a loose brick in my wall instead. Performing my normal duties soon became an exercise in compartmentalization. By day, I was the model organist again, playing the expected hymns, nodding politely to parishioners who thanked me for elevating their spirits. But the joy I once took in that routine was dimmed. How could I be satisfied leading the choir in the litany of the sacred martyrs after I'd tasted a symphony of the abyss? The gulf between what I gave the congregation and what I experienced in secret widened with each week. I started noticing the flaws and monotony in our liturgical music, the endless, repeating choruses, the lack of daring. It grated on me. I caught myself adding subtle embellishments during Mass, a ripple of arpeggio beneath a verse here, a slightly prolonged cadence there. Small things that probably only I noticed, but they were enough to earn curious side eyes from Sister Dominica and an outright scowl from Cantor Matthias on one occasion. Afterwards, Matthias cornered me in the organ loft, his old face stern. "I don't know what's gotten into you, boy," he hissed under his breath, mindful of the lingering faithful below. "You do not improvise during holy services, ever. Do I make myself clear?" I felt a flare of irritation but kept my head bowed. "Yes, Cantor, forgive me. I was carried by the spirit of the moment." "See that it doesn't carry you again," he replied sharply. "Zeal is admirable, but not at the expense of tradition." As he turned to leave, he added in a quieter tone, "And you've been absent at odd times. Others have noticed. Don't think because you play well that you're above scrutiny. Stay on the path." The warning was clear. I nodded dutifully, but inside I seethed. Stay on the path, like it was a bad thing that I tried something new to glorify the Emperor. I didn't argue, but a rebellious thought sparked. What harm was there, really, in a little creativity? The congregation had seemed more awake during my embellished postlude, hadn't they? The God Emperor surely wouldn't begrudge a bit of passion in his praise. But Matthias's reaction made plain that, in the Imperium, even passion must be sanctioned. Still, I tried to keep a low profile at the chapel. I couldn't afford to be barred from playing, especially now that the instrument had become my outlet for all the restless energy building in me. In stolen moments alone, I played fragments of my new works on the organ, listening to the rich notes spill through the empty nave. Once I dared play a portion of the sonata I had written under Joy Wine's influence. The acoustics of the chapel gave it a reverent grandeur that sent a thrill through me. But halfway through, a door creaked and I abruptly segued back into a harmless hymn tune as one of the sextons wandered through. I felt like a criminal hiding contraband. In a sense, I was. And contraband soon moved beyond just sheet music. One gathering at Sirius's took a decidedly darker turn that I will never forget. The salon began normally, music, wine, heady conversation. But later in the evening, Sirius clapped his hands for attention and announced a special performance art piece. The guests murmured with anticipation and formed a circle in one of the drawing rooms. I, slightly dizzy with Joy Wine, squeezed in to watch. Two servants brought in a low table draped with satin. Upon it lay an assortment of peculiar items: candles, a silver tray of surgical-looking tools, and a glossy black case. From the crowd, a figure stepped forward, one of the noblemen who frequented the salon, a gaunt fellow named Varius, known for his dramatic flair. He removed his embroidered coat, revealing a bare torso underneath, thin and marked with scars. No, they looked like deliberate patterns etched into his skin, runes, though I did not recognize the script at the time. The room hushed. I felt a tremor of unease cut through my buzz. Varius began to speak in a low, lilting tone about the fleeting nature of sensation, how true art must sometimes hurt to be fully appreciated. With a theatrical flourish, he opened the black case on the table, revealing a violin. But not just any violin, this one was crafted of some pale material, and its strings glinted unnaturally. I realized with a start that the violin's body was fashioned from bone, human or otherwise, I couldn't tell, and the strings looked like fine strands of hair or sinew. A collective murmur swept the circle. He lifted the bow, which was equally macabre, wooden, but inlaid with what appeared to be tiny teeth along its length. My mouth went dry. Was this a prop? It had to be, but it looked far too real and well used. Varius set the violin beneath his chin and nodded to another salon member, a woman in a hooded robe who I'd barely noticed before. She stepped forward and, to my surprise and growing horror, slipped a long pin out of her sleeve and drew it sharply across Varius's exposed chest. He gasped, along with several onlookers, as a thin red line of blood blossomed on his skin. Before I could react, Varius placed bow to string and began to play. The sound that issued from that grotesque violin was haunting beyond belief. Each time the bow moved, it was as if his very wound sang. The melody was raw, chaotic, yet carried an undercurrent of sorrowful beauty. With every few bars, the hooded assistant would make another cut or pierce his flesh with a small needle from the tray, and his music would jolt and wail in response to his sharp intake of breath. It was a duet of pain and sound. I stood transfixed, horrified, and fascinated in equal measure. My rational mind screamed to intervene. This was self-mutilation madness. But another part of me was enthralled by the intensity of it. The other guests watched with rapt hunger in their eyes, some flushed and breathing heavily as if aroused. A coppery scent of blood mingled with the incense in the air. I realized one of my hands was covering my mouth, the other clenched white knuckle at my side. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the spectacle. Varius reached a crescendo, both musical and physical. His torso was crisscrossed with cuts now, rivulets tracing patterns over his skin. Tears mingled with sweat on his face, yet he smiled through them, utterly lost in his performance. The music he coaxed from that infernal instrument soared to a keening peak, so beautiful and horrifying that I felt tears on my own cheeks. The final note came as the robed woman plunged a fine needle directly into his left forearm. He screamed, a sound that somehow harmonized with the violin's last cry, then collapsed to his knees, shaking. The room erupted in applause and exultant laughter. A few rushed forward to tend him, applying cloth and antiseptic to his wounds. My stomach churned, and I feared I might vomit the rich wine and drugs I'd consumed. This was beyond any art I knew. Yet the thought of denouncing it as heresy or insanity never left my lips. Why? Perhaps because a small voice within whispered that I had just witnessed something profound, a pushing of boundaries that, while extreme, was indeed a form of expression. Twisted, yes, but in that twisting something new had been created. Celine noticed my pallor and guided me gently to a chaise. "Are you unwell, love?" she asked, stroking my hair as one might comfort a frightened pet. That was... I struggled for words, my heart still hammering. "He hurt himself for music, for a spectacle." She tilted my chin to face her. Her cybernetic eyes whirred softly as their irises dilated, focusing on me. Sometimes, dear, we must bleed for our art. Pain and pleasure, two sides of one coin. Did you not find it moving?" There was an intensity to her tone, as if my answer truly mattered to her. I swallowed hard. It was unlike anything I've seen, terrible and beautiful. That was the truth. My emotions were a tangled knot. Part of me was deeply disturbed, another part strangely inspired. Terrible and beautiful was all I could articulate. Celine's painted lips curved in a pleased smile. Exactly. To reach beyond ordinary limits, sometimes we must embrace what others find abhorrent. That is the creed of this little circle, my talented friend. She pressed a fresh goblet of amasec into my hand. "Drink. Steady yourself. You did so well to endure that. Many outsiders would have fled at the sight. But you," she traced a finger along my cheek. "You understand, don't you? There is truth in these extremes." I wasn't sure I fully understood, but I nodded weakly. I took a long gulp of the amasec, the fiery liquid helping to quell my nausea. Across the room, Lord Sirius helped the bloodied Varius stand, praising him for his performance as others dabbed at the cuts. Within minutes, the atmosphere returned to a festive post-show celebration, as if what we'd witnessed was not a man mutilating himself, but an actor finishing a play. Varius, after catching his breath and downing a narcotic-laced drink of his own, was already making witty jokes about hitting the wrong notes when the knife slipped. His nonchalance was as astonishing as the act itself. Later that night, back in my quarters, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the patterns of blood on Varius's chest, heard that tortured music echo in my ears. I felt revulsion, yes, but also an undeniable spark of dark fascination. Is this what Sister Dominica had feared when she warned me years ago? The memory of her disapproving stare surfaced. If she knew I'd been party to such a thing, she'd call it a corruption of the soul. Maybe she'd be right. But in the stillness of that early morning, a creeping thought came. If that is corruption, it hides a strange enlightenment. I sat up and lit a candle. Trembling with the audacity of it, I pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and tried to transcribe from memory the melody Varius had played, the Pain violin's lament. The tune came haltingly. I lacked the unique timbre of his instrument or the literal sting that drove him. But I wrote what I could recall of the notes between the screams. In the margins, I scribbled impressions. Scream motif here, discord, then resolve, a sharp crescendo like a cry. It was the first time I had explicitly tried to capture emotion rather than mathematical harmony on the page. I found myself quietly sobbing as I did so, reliving the intensity. Yet, when I set the quill down, I felt cleansed in an odd way, as if translating that horror into music siphoned it out of my nightmares and into something I could understand. I hid those pages with the others, my secret trove of forbidden compositions growing. By now, it contained sketches of alien melodies, drug-fueled symphonies, and the raw pain sonata of Varius. Looking at the collection, I realized that my old works, simple hymns and safe lullabies, had no place among them. I had, unknowingly, crossed a threshold. The music I was making now was no longer meant for church halls or common ears. It was something private, transgressive, and powerful. Something that belonged to the shadowed corners of a lord's mansion and the quiet whispers of a hidden clique. I told myself these pieces were just exercises, diversions, that I could quit the salon gatherings any time I wanted, that I still served the Emperor in my day-to-day life, and this secret indulgence didn't change that. After all, I wasn't the one cutting myself open on a table. I was just observing, learning. This was for the sake of art, wasn't it? And art, some part of me argued, transcends petty morality. The Emperor gifted me talent, I rationalized in those days. Surely he would approve of me honing it, even if the methods are unconventional. Deep down, I think I knew I was justifying the unjustifiable. But the descent into true heresy is rarely a leap. More often, it's a tumble down a slope, one small slide at a time. I was sliding quickly now, and events were looming that would soon send me hurtling headlong into the abyss, without a hope of return. Not long after the night of Varius's performance, fate caught up with me in the form of Sister Dominica. In my growing boldness, or carelessness, I had made a grave mistake. Amid my secret composition frenzy, I must have misplaced one of my illicit music sheets. Perhaps it fell from my pocket in the chapel loft, or I left it pressed between pages of a hymnal. However it happened, Sister Dominica found it. I remember that afternoon vividly. The chapel was empty, save for dust dancing in sunbeams and the faint smell of incense from morning mass. I was in the organ loft tidying up, humming a tune under my breath, one of my new ones, softly. Suddenly, I sensed someone behind me. I turned, and there stood Sister Dominica, habit rustling, her aging face carved with disapproval even deeper than years ago when she'd caught me playing a lullaby. In her hands, held like one might a dead rat, was a crumpled piece of parchment. Even at a distance, I recognized the spiky, unconventional notes scrawled upon it. My blood ran cold. "What is this, Marcus?" she asked quietly. Yes, that's my name, though hearing it from her lips in that tone made me wish to be nameless. I descended the loft ladder slowly, every joint stiff with dread. "It's music, sister," I answered, trying to keep my voice even. "Just a draft of a new hymn I've been working on." My lie sounded weak even to me. She glanced at the sheet again, lips pursed. "Do not insult my intelligence. These notes, I have never seen their like. The intervals, the structure, it's all wrong. And these words scribbled in the margin." She squinted at the parchment. "They are not High Gothic. In fact, they resemble no holy language at all." Her eyes flashed as she fixed me with a piercing stare. "Where did you learn this?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came. My mind raced for a plausible story, that it was an old regional folk song, maybe. But Dominica was no fool. The markings likely looked sinister to her already. She stepped closer, the wooden boards creaking under her simple shoes. I unconsciously backed away until I felt the railing of the loft press into my spine. "You have changed, Marcus," she said, each word stern as a judge's sentence. "Sneaking off at odd hours, irreverent flourishes in the liturgy, and now this thing. This is heresy on paper." That word, heresy, sent a jolt through me. My instinct was to protest, to deny everything. "No, sister, I swear it's just music. I found a fragment of it in an old archive and tried to expand on it. There's nothing ungodly intended." Lies spilled out desperately, but Dominica's expression only hardened. "Ungodly, Marcus. I feel unclean merely holding this." She tossed the sheet onto a nearby lectern as if it burned her fingers. "In the Emperor's name, what have you gotten yourself into?" I realized with dawning horror that there was no talk my way out of this. She was already convinced of my corruption. Perhaps if I had confessed meekly and begged forgiveness, she might have tried to help me repent. But standing there with my forbidden creation exposed, panic and pride warred within me. I thought of the cult's warnings. If discovered, the consequences would be dire. The Inquisition would not pause to question. I'd be executed or worse, and likely Dominica along with me just for reading that page. My thoughts flew to Lord Sirius and the others. If she reported this, their whole circle could be at risk. "Sister," I said, forcing calm into my voice, "it's not what you think. Please, just give it back and I'll destroy it. We can forget this." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of disgust crossing her face. "Forget? Oh, Marcus, I cannot simply forget witnessing blasphemy. This must be brought to the ecclesiarch's attention. You must be cleansed of whatever influences have seized you. She actually looked pained saying it, but resolute. I cared for you like a son when you were that little choir boy with the sweet voice. But I will not hesitate to do what's necessary for your soul and the souls you endanger. At that moment, I knew she would show me no mercy, and in her zeal she would condemn not only what I'd done, but all who were part of it. A hot spike of resentment drove into me. All her talk of caring, yet the instant I strayed from her narrow path, she was willing to hand me over to the flames. The Imperium's love is conditional. Step outside the lines and see how quickly it becomes wrath. Something Sirius had said came back to me. Those who fear the flame. Dominica feared what she didn't understand, and she would burn me for it. My heart thundered. No, I found myself saying. You don't understand, sister. There's more to music, more to life, than these rigid hymns and fear. Her eyes widened at my tone. Listen to yourself. This is the corruption speaking. Marcus, for the love of Terra, stand down. Come with me willingly. We will pray, purify. I'm not going anywhere with you, I snapped, voice rising. I've seen beauty you wouldn't believe, felt things beyond your comprehension, and none of it, none, has made me a monster. A lie, perhaps, given all I'd witnessed, but I was past reason. Dominica's face went ashen. Emperor, preserve us, she whispered, making the sign of the aquila over her chest. The devil's snare has you. With that, she turned on her heel, robes swirling, clearly intending to march out and raise the alarm immediately. Something in me cracked then, the same cracking sound I'd heard in my soul with that first forbidden note, now loud as a gunshot. I couldn't let her leave. If she walked out of the chapel within the hour, I'd be arrested, the cult unmasked. Everything would be lost, my music, my new companions, my very life. I acted without thinking. Perhaps if I had paused even a second, I might have let her go and accepted my fate. But reflex and terror drove me. I lunged forward and grabbed her arm. "Unhand me!" she cried, surprisingly strong as she wrenched against my grip. "I'm sorry," I babbled, "but I can't let you do this." She swung her free hand at me, the edge of her palm cracking across my cheek. "Release me, heretic," she spat, her voice more fury than fear. "Guards, help!" she began shouting at the top of her lungs, hoping the hired ecclesiarchy, guards outside, might hear. Panic surged. I clamped a hand over her mouth instinctively. She bit down hard on my palm and I yelped, tasting blood where her teeth cut me. In reflex, I shoved her. It all happened so fast. I shoved harder than I intended. Dominica stumbled backwards, her feet tangling in the hem of her robes. Time seemed to slow as I watched her totter at the edge of the loft's landing. I reached out, too late. With a look of shock and sorrow more than anger, Sister Dominica fell. The sickening thud of her body hitting the pews below jolted time back to speed. I gasped and leaned over the railing. She lay crumpled on the stone floor, habit spread around her like black wings. She wasn't moving. A crimson pool began to form beneath her head, staining the marble. I think I screamed her name. I'm not sure. The next minutes are a blur seared in my memory. I flew down the spiral staircase from the loft, nearly tripping in my haste. I rushed to her side. Her eyes were half open, lips moving faintly. I caught a broken murmur. "Emperor, forgive," and then her gaze fixed on nothing. The light in her eyes flickered out. Sister Dominica was dead. Because of me. My shaking fingers fumbled for a pulse at her neck. There was none. Her old bones had snapped from the fall. Her skull was horribly indented. I recoiled, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. I had just killed a servant of the Emperor, a woman who had watched me grow, who only moments ago pleaded for my soul. I staggered to my feet, hyperventilating. What had I done? The reality was too enormous to process. All I knew was that I had to get away, to think. The chapel still echoed with the violence, the overturned lectern, the lone sheet of forbidden music drifting down from above to land atop a pew like a final condemnation. Any guards outside must not have heard her brief cry, or perhaps weren't nearby. The ecclesiarchy wasn't wealthy enough here for constant patrols, but it wouldn't be long until someone came in and found this scene. I couldn't be here when that happened. Legs moving on autopilot, I stumbled out a side door of the chapel into a dank alley. Adrenaline roared in my ears. I remember mumbling, "Throne, throne, throne," over and over, a child's invocation to the Emperor, even as I ran from what I'd done to one of his own. Without conscious decision, I found myself navigating through winding back streets toward the only sanctuary I had left, Lord Sirius's mansion. It was irrational, going directly to the den of sin that had led me here, but where else could I turn? Not to my family. I couldn't endanger them, and they would surely cast me out if they knew. Not to any imperial authority. They'd execute me on the spot. The cultists were now my only allies, twisted as that was. I must have looked a fright when I arrived, winded and smeared with blood. I realized belatedly some of Dominica's blood had gotten on my shirt when I knelt by her. The sun had set. The salons weren't active this night, but a few acolytes of Sirius kept watch at the gates. They recognized me and quickly ushered me in, alarmed by my state. I was babbling incoherently about Sister Dominica, about being found out. I recall hands guiding me to sit, a cool cloth pressed to my brow, voices trying to soothe. After some moments, Lord Sirius himself appeared, hastily thrown into a velvet robe, concern furrowing his patrician features. "What happened?" he asked gently, though there was urgency under the calm. Haltingly, I confessed it all between gasps and sobs. That Dominica discovered my music, that she tried to turn me in, and that I had my throat closed up, that she was dead. Saying it aloud was like swallowing hot coals. I expected Sirius to recoil or curse in anger at how I'd imperiled them all, but he did not. To my surprise, Curious knelt and embraced me, heedless of the blood stains. "There now, it's all right," he murmured, in a tone one might use for a frightened child. "We knew this day might come, did we not? You have been walking a perilous path between two worlds, Marcus. It was only a matter of time before the old world struck at you." I shuddered in his arms, not quite understanding. I didn't want to kill her," I managed to say. My cheeks were wet. I was crying, though I hadn't realized when the tears began. The face of Sister Dominica as she fell, the betrayal and sadness in her eyes, would not leave my mind. "Of course you didn't," Sirius soothed, patting my hair. "You defended yourself, that's all, and us. If she had gotten away, you know what would have followed. In a way, you have saved many lives tonight, including your own, by acting as you did." Saved lives? I hadn't thought of it that way. My scrambled mind tried to latch on to any justification to dam the flood of guilt. Perhaps he was right. If she'd alerted the authorities, the cult would be rounded up. There might have been a bloody purge of dozens of people, including innocents at the chapel, if the Arbites got trigger-happy. One life versus many. A terrible equation, but maybe one that came out in my favor. I loathed that line of thinking, even as it comforted that selfish part of me, desperate for absolution. Another cult member, a stout man named Dorian, who often handled more practical matters, cleared his throat. "My lord, we should resolve the situation at the chapel quickly before it's discovered by unwanted eyes." Sirius nodded gravely and released me from the hug, steadying me by the shoulders. Listen carefully, Marcus. Dorian will go with a few associates to tidy up. They will remove any incriminating items and make it look like an accident or a crime of opportunity. His tone was so matter-of-fact that I blinked in astonishment. They would cover it up? My mind flashed to Dominica's crumpled form. What would they do with her body? The thought turned my stomach, but I also felt a flicker of relief so profound it was shameful. I should have insisted we come clean, turn myself in, but I didn't. I simply nodded numbly. Sirius took my hand, his gaze intent. From this moment, you must consider your old life gone, my dear boy. The die is cast. You cannot return to that chapel or to the choir. His voice was gentle but firm, delivering the reality I already knew deep down. The good sister's absence will be noted. Investigations will follow. We will try to deflect suspicion, but you must stay out of sight. A small whimper escaped me. It all felt too sudden. Though I had drifted from the Emperor's path for some time, the chapel had still been my anchor, my facade of normalcy. Now even that was shattered. There was no going back, only forward into the unknown dark. Celine appeared then, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. I hadn't even seen her arrive, but there she was, offering a cup of something steaming. "Drink this," she urged softly. "It will calm you." The liquid was bitter and herb-scented, no doubt some concoction of hers or a mild soporific. I sipped and warmth spread through my limbs. "They'll hunt me," I murmured after a moment, staring blankly at the ornate carpet. "When they find out, they'll hunt me." I was thinking of the Inquisition, of course. A chill shook me at the mental image of black-clad arbiters kicking down doors, witch-finders with their psych whips. "Perhaps, but you are not alone," Sirius said. "We protect our own. We will move you somewhere safe for now." Within the hour, as Dorian and a couple of toughs slipped away into the night to handle Sister Dominica's remains, the others spirited me to a new hiding place. We left the mansion discreetly, through a hidden tunnel that connected to an adjacent, abandoned administratum office the cult had obviously prepared for emergencies. I was smuggled to a safe house deep in the mid-hive, far from my usual haunts. It was a dingy apartment tucked above a shuttered cloth dyer's shop. The walls were stained with ancient chemical splashes, and the air stank of pungent dyes, but I hardly noticed. Celine stayed by my side, tending me with a quiet diligence. She wiped the blood from my hands and face. My God, I hadn't even realized some of Dominica's blood had spattered my cheek when I knelt by her. Seeing it on the cloth made me retch anew. Celine whispered soothing nonsense and cleaned me like a child. That night, or what remained of it, I drifted in and out of a stupor on a lumpy cot as the draft she'd given me took effect. My dreams were feverish amalgams of song and screams. I thought I heard Sister Dominica leading a choir in a dirge, only to see her turn and her face become one of the demonettes from Varius's performance, laughing at me. I awoke with a start before dawn, choking back a scream. Celine was dozing in a chair nearby and came to my side immediately. "Hush, it's all right," she cooed, offering me water. "Bad dreams?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. She stroked my hair. "They will pass. You've been through a crucible tonight, but the worst is over, Marcus. You're reborn now on the other side of fear." Reborn, the word had an ominous weight. I didn't feel reborn. I felt hollowed out, but also strangely unmoored from guilt. Perhaps it was the shock or the drugs, but as I sat there in that dingy safe house, a new realization dawned. I had severed the last tie to my previous life. My mentor would likely disown me, my church would label me an abomination, and a woman who represented the Imperium's strict mercy was dead by my hands. And yet here I still was, breathing, thinking. The world had not ended. In the candle's flicker, I even dared think the Emperor did not smite me for my sin. It was a blasphemous thought, but in it lay a kernel of dark freedom. I had broken one of the highest laws, killing a servant of the throne, and lived. From here on, what could possibly be forbidden to me that I hadn't already done? Tears pricked my eyes, not of sorrow this time, but a kind of desperate, defiant resolve. Selene must have seen something in my face, for she leaned in and kissed my forehead like a mother. "We will take care of you. Slaanesh watches over those who have the courage to take what they desire." It was the first time I heard the name spoken aloud in my presence. Slaanesh. I had heard hints and titles only. Prince of Pleasure, Dark Prince, the Lord of Excess. Now the name of the god was given shape in the air. It hummed through me, resonant like the strike of a distant gong. I was too emotionally drained to respond with more than a faint nod, but inside the sound of that name stirred a mixture of fear and reverence. I had done murder, yes, but perhaps in that act I had been initiated fully into the service of something beyond mortal law. The thought was terrifying. The thought was exhilarating. "Rest now," Selene said, easing me back down. "Dream of the new world you will create with us." I closed my eyes, letting exhaustion overtake me once more. The last conscious image I remember was the gentle curl of a smile on Selene's lips as she watched me, a smile not of judgment or horror, but of pride. In the weeks that followed Sister Dominica's death, I shed the last remnants of my old life like a snakeskin. At Lord Sirius's insistence, I remained hidden in the safe house most of the time. News filtered in through the cult's network. Dominica's body had been found by parishioners, and her death ruled a tragic accident due to a fall. Dorian had done his work well. There was some initial suspicion, a few whispers that perhaps she was pushed, but with no witnesses and me conspicuously vanished, the official inquiry stalled. A notice went out that I, Marcus, was wanted for questioning in connection to her demise and my unexplained absence. The local Arbites posted my likeness at precincts, a grainy hololith capturing a much more innocent version of me in choir robes no less. Sirius managed to acquire a copy. I recall staring at it, half laughing, half crying at the irony. The charge listed was possible heretical activity. They knew, or at least suspected, that something unholy was afoot. Yet, in that claustrophobic hideaway, I underwent a dark metamorphosis. Selene and Sirius visited often to keep my spirits steady and continue my education. They brought books. Yes, books, actual bound tomes, some inked by quill and illuminated with images that would make a confessor rip out his eyes. These were prescribed texts of lore and art that the cult had amassed, some human, some Xenos, and some perhaps dictated by entities beyond the veil of reality. By dim candlelight, I read feverishly. If I was damned, I decided I would embrace the knowledge that damnation offered. One tome, in High Gothic, recounted the debaucheries of the pre-heresy nobility and the fall of the Eldar, drawing parallels about societies destroyed by excess. Another, in a scrawl of Low Gothic shorthand, described forbidden cult rites across the sector, including a disturbing passage about a sect that tried to create music from the screams of dying sons, a metaphor, I hoped. Some pages contained musical notations said to be copied from the infamous Maraviglia, a word that kept appearing. My curiosity piqued. I asked Sirius about it when he next visited. His eyes lit up. "Ah, the Maraviglia, a legend among those who revere true art. Where did you see mention of it?" I showed him the crumbling page. He ran a finger over the notes lovingly. "Bekwa Kinska's Grand Symphony," he explained softly, "composed and performed for Fulgrim and all the assembled Astartes of the Emperor's children. back in the Horus Heresy. It said that piece of music, an outpouring of unbridled sensation, was so potent it tore reality, summoning a host of demons and corrupting all who heard it. It marked the Astartes' final fall to Slaanesh. I stared at him, mouth agape. I had heard hushed references to the dark days of the heresy, but nothing of this detail. A composition that could break the boundary between worlds? That sounded both terrifying and inspiring. Is it real, the music? Does it survive? I asked, my composer's mind immediately alight with questions. Only fragments and second-hand transcriptions, Sirius replied, tapping the page. Like this. The Inquisition destroyed most records, of course, but those who walk our path pass down whispers of it. Kinska became a martyr to art, killed by the very denizens she summoned. A cautionary tale, perhaps, but also a benchmark. Many of us have dreamed of recapturing a sliver of that genius, that power. He looked at me meaningfully. The implication hung in the air. Could I be the one to finish what Kinska began? To create a symphony that would make the Maraviglia pale? The thought was intoxicating. My ambition, once limited to an extra flourish in a psalm, now soared to outrageous heights. I felt a grin tug at my lips despite the grim circumstances. The seed of an idea had firmly planted itself in my soul. I began composing in earnest, not just scribbling fragments, but planning a true magnum opus, a piece to honor Slaanesh, to exalt everything I had come to learn and feel. In my cramped hideout, hunched over stolen sheaves of parchment, I drafted movement after movement. I poured in the ecstasy of joy wine haze, the sensual lilt of the fringe melodies, the anguish of Varius's pain violin, the haunting regret of Sister Dominica's death, even the distant cosmic wail I imagined from the Maraviglia's legend. It all went into the cauldron of my composition. Themes intertwined, pleasure and pain dancing a duet, order and chaos resolving into higher harmony. At times I would laugh aloud in triumph at a progression that surprised even me. At other times I'd break down weeping as I wrote, overcome by the emotion I was trying to encapsulate. The cult, for their part, recognized what I was attempting. They began to speak of the performance, always capitalized in tone, that we would eventually stage. It became their collective mission to facilitate my vision. A secret cabal of them formed essentially an orchestra under my direction. Among our ranks were other minor musicians, a cellist, a drummer, a singer or two, who until now had only toyed with their art. I trained them brutally in those hidden days. Their earlier salon trifles were nothing compared to what I demanded now. Absolute dedication, a willingness to play until fingers bled and voices cracked. Some nights our rehearsals in the safe house or other secluded basements turned into fevered orgies of sound and sensation. If a singer hit a sour note, I'd snap, perhaps harsher than I should. My temper was shortening, I noticed. But then Celine might step in, running a blade lightly across the offender's skin, not as punishment, but as motivation. The yelp of pain often gave their next attempt a passionate edge that completed the chord. And we would smile because we all understood by then. Without sacrifice, without pushing beyond limits, this piece would never achieve transcendence. I think it was during one such rehearsal that I first noticed the mark upon me. We had paused for a break after a particularly intense section of music left us panting. My shirt was damp, so I shrugged it off to cool. One of the others suddenly gasped, pointing at my chest. "Look, the prince's favor!" she exclaimed. Right above my heart, etched faintly as if in pink ink under the skin, was a symbol, a curved line with a circle, and another line descending from it crossed. The combined sign of male and female, the mark of Slaanesh. I hadn't seen it before. Had it appeared just then, or had it been slowly manifesting? I touched it gingerly. It felt neither raised nor sore, but when I pressed it, a ripple of sensation radiated out, making me shiver pleasurably. My fellow cultists were awed and delighted. "You are truly chosen now," Celine said, tracing the mark with reverence and sending another electric thrill through me as she did. "Our Lord of Excess has set claim on you." I should have been alarmed to literally bear a chaos mark. Part of me was, distantly, but a greater part felt pride and relief. In the Imperium, no matter how faithful I'd been, I'd never felt seen by the God Emperor. But here was incontrovertible evidence that a god, albeit a dark one, acknowledged me. I'd be lying if I said it didn't swell my ego. I ran my fingers over the subtle sign again, then couldn't resist playing a dramatic glissando on the nearby harmonium, announcing to all, "Marked indeed. Let's ensure we earn it." My transformation was not just spiritual and mental, but physical too. The effects of Slaanesh's corruption took hold gradually. My senses, already heightened by drugs and practice, sharpened further beyond natural human limits. I began to hear the faintest of sounds, the scuttling of a rat in the walls, the heartbeat of a person across the room. Smells became richer. Sometimes I could taste emotions on my tongue when I walked into a space, the tang of fear, the sweetness of contentment. At times, the overload was almost maddening. I recall stumbling out into a midnight downpour once, desperate to drown out an onslaught of sensory input. The gentle patter of rain sounded like 1,000 drums to me. Each flash of lightning was blinding art across the sky. I stood there, arms outstretched, head thrown back, letting the rain soak me, and I screamed, in anguish or ecstasy, I'm not sure which. Possibly both. When I came back inside, I found Sirius calmly observing. He didn't ask if I was all right. He simply said, "We are shaped by our passions, and you, my friend, are being forged into something extraordinary." Perhaps that was his way of comforting me. It did, in a strange way. The Inquisition's presence on Gina Prime grew over those weeks. We heard rumors through our underworld contacts that an interrogator had arrived, maybe even an inquisitor themselves, under pretense of investigating common heresies, but clearly tying it to the sister's death and my disappearance. Our cult moved like a wounded animal, carefully and in shadows. We relocated twice more, each safe house more hidden than the last. At one point, Arbites conducted a surprise sweep through a neighborhood we'd vacated barely hours before. Had we still been there, we'd have been caught with incriminating paraphernalia for sure. My nightmares now were often of heavy boots kicking down the door and bolter shots tearing apart my sheet music. That, more than my own demise, I feared, that my magnum opus would be silenced before it could be born. Under this pressure, our timetable advanced. Sirius convened a gathering of the core cult leadership in a secret location, a derelict opera house deep in the Underhive, long abandoned after a fire decades ago. By lumen globes and candlelight, we discussed the grand event. It was decided we would hold the performance there, amid the charred grandeur of a once sanctified stage of art. The symbolism delighted me. From the ashes of obsolete imperial art, we would birth something gloriously new and terrible. Preparations became feverish. The cult smuggled in equipment steadily. Instruments, some conventional, others custom-made to my design or recovered from forbidden caches, were assembled. One of our number was a disaffected tech priest who had secretly aligned with us. His expertise was invaluable in constructing amplifiers and arcane devices to augment sound. He created strange Vox resonators, and at my suggestion, even integrated some xenotech crystals looted from a trader in Eldar artifacts to distort and enhance frequencies beyond normal hearing. We built enormous speakers from scrap and wired them through the old orchestra pit. I joked darkly that we were building our own organ of chaos, like some twisted inversion of the pipe organ I once played for hymns. Our singers prepared chants in warp-touched tongues. Sirius provided a tome said to contain demonic invocations, verses that could lure entities of the warp. Incorporating these into the libretto of my composition was tricky. The words were difficult to pronounce and had peculiar rhythmic requirements. But when set correctly to music, speaking them even softly made the air tremble unnaturally. The first time one of our vocalists, a gaunt tenor named Lyrian, sang a line of the dark speech during rehearsal, all the candles in the hall flickered and a mirror shattered on the far wall with a sharp crack. We all paused, silence reigning. Then a slow smile spread on my face. It was working. Not everything was smooth. Tensions flared occasionally. One evening, the drummer, an ex-guardsman with augmetic hands, got into a heated argument with Varius, who had recovered from his self-inflicted wounds and was part of our orchestra. The drummer felt the beats I'd assigned lacked aggression, while Varius insisted on more subtle tantric rhythms. Their bickering grew loud. Already on edge with stress, I marched over, snatched the drumsticks from the drummer, and struck him across the face with them. "You will play it exactly as written," I snarled, scarcely recognizing my own hoarse, vicious voice. The man clutched his bleeding cheek, shock and fury in his eyes. For a heartbeat, I thought he might retaliate. But then he saw the madness in my expression and the eager faces of others around, for by now most were fanatically loyal to me as Slaanesh's chosen composer. He yielded, muttering an apology. I'd never led men like that before, through fear as much as inspiration. It was exhilarating and frightening in equal measure, another step away from the gentle soul I once was. Through all this, Celine remained my closest companion. If Sirius was like the guiding hand of a patron, Celine was the whispering muse at my shoulder. She indulged my moods when I was despondent and stoked my fire when I was driven. On particularly grueling nights, she'd lead me aside into the opera house's old manager's office, where she set up a sort of den of pleasure. Soft cushions, narcotic incense, delicacies to eat. There, she'd coax me to rest, or sometimes to indulge in other forms of release. I won't detail those intimacies, suffice to say that the line between pain and pleasure truly blurred for me on some of those nights. Celine had a talent for unlocking new sensations. A bite on the lip, veering into delicious pain, a soothing caress, followed by a sudden scratch of nails down the back. Each time, she'd afterward remark how my music grew richer for the experiences. I suspect she was right. I began to understand deeply the creed that no aspect of life is off-limits, every sensation fuel for creation. At times I thought of my family, my parents and siblings back in the lower hive. Did they know what had become of me? I doubted it. Perhaps the clergy told them I disappeared, possibly marking me as a heretic. I imagined my mother crying in shame, my father grimly scrubbing my name from our home records. The thought hurt, but I found I could compartmentalize it. That life felt like a story I'd read in a book about someone else. I had become someone else, truly. If I succeeded in our plans, the names they whispered about me would be far removed from the simple son they'd once nurtured. Perhaps it was better they thought me dead. One dawn, as I snatched a few hours of sleep on the balcony seats of the derelict opera, I had a peculiar dream. I stood on a vast stage under a sky, not of a theater, but of swirling iridescent colors. Before me spread an audience of unidentifiable shapes, hundreds of figures, their features shifting, some human, some not, some flickering like candle flames. I was about to play, but I had no instrument. Instead, when I opened my mouth, a pure note came out, resonant and clarion. The audience shivered. The colors in the sky pulsed in response. I continued to sing a wordless aria and realized I wasn't in control of the notes. They were flowing through me, choosing me as their vessel. With each rising pitch, some of the shadowy audience members simply dissolved into blissful dust. The higher I sang, the more disintegrated, until only 6 remained, 6 points of light, and these rose from their seats and bowed to me. When I stopped, silence hung like a weight. Then those 6 lights rushed at me and into me, and I felt a surge of power and ecstasy unlike any waking sensation. I was overflowing, burning, transcendental. I woke with a start, panting, heart hammering. 6! The sacred number of Slaanesh, whispered a voice in my mind. Was it a prophecy? A metaphor? Simply a stress dream? I didn't know, but it reinforced my resolve to see this endeavor through, no matter the cost. Soon all was in place. The composition, my grand symphony, was complete, scored meticulously across dozens of pages. I titled it The Threnody of the Empyrean. Perhaps pretentious, but it felt right. A threnody is a song of lament, and Empyrean a word for the warp. A lament for the warp, a paradox, or perhaps an offering. Our orchestra and choir were drilled and ready. The venue prepared. The old opera house took on a new life in those final days. We draped it in opulent fabrics, scavenged and stolen. Deep purples and silks shot with gold, the colors of Slaanesh. Strange incense burners were placed around, ready to suffuse the air with intoxicants during the performance. Symbols were painted across the stage, and seating in a pale, luminescent paint, most were arcane sigils to guide the ritual's energy, as instructed by our tech priest and a warlock-like fellow who claimed some minor psychic ability. I copied some of the symbols from the margins of that tome of invocations, ensuring to include the sign of Slaanesh prominently at the focal point of the stage where I would stand. It felt as much ceremony as concert, and indeed it was both. We had even prepared the audience. This was a point of debate among us. Initially, Sirius suggested it should be only our cult present, both to perform and to witness. But others argued that more bodies, even uninitiated ones, would amplify the experience and the offering to Slaanesh. In the end, a compromise. They would bring a select group of outsiders to attend, individuals already teetering on the edge of excess or disillusionment, who could be easily swayed or used as fodder. Over the years, Sirius had many contacts among the nobility and underworld. Quiet invitations were sent out in the form of embossed cards, the double-faced mask insignia again, promising a sensational, exclusive event of music and delight. Only those who responded with the correct passphrase, something innocuous to normal folks but telling to fellow deviants, would get the details. We knew some would likely be Imperial loyalists trying to investigate, but we had measures planned for that. Mainly, once the performance started, it wouldn't matter who they were. They'd be swept up and dealt with by the outcome. It was a risk, but one we were willing to take. More guests meant more minds and souls to shape, or to expend. I spent the final hours before showtime in solitude, by my own insistence. In a back room of the opera house that had once served as a dressing room, I prepared myself. I donned my chosen attire, a flamboyant yet eerie ensemble the cult's seamstress had tailored. It resembled an old-fashioned conductor's suit crossed with something a demonic carnival ringmaster might wear, high-collared, trimmed in silver filigree, dyed in shades of violet and blue that shifted in the light. It felt both like armor and a costume, one I wore to become more than mortal for the task ahead. Standing before a cracked mirror, I took stock of my reflection. The face looking back was me, but changed. Thinner, paler, no sun in hiding, eyes ringed with kohl. Celine insisted on that cosmetic touch, to bring out the madness in my gaze. There was a feverish brightness in my eyes that I scarcely recognized. A lock of my dark hair had turned stark white. When had that happened? Possibly the night my mark appeared. Instead of alarm, I found it added to my new persona. I raised a hand and carefully drew a symbol on my forehead with violet pigment. The mark of Slaanesh, proudly displayed. A year ago, I would have vomited at the idea of painting a chaos sigil on my flesh. Now it gave me confidence, as though I truly were an anointed priest of a new order, putting on holy vestments. In that quiet moment, I murmured a few lines of prayer. Yes, prayer. Not to the Emperor on Terra, no, that part of me was dead, but to the Prince of Pleasure. It wasn't formal, I just spoke from the heart softly. Lord Slaanesh, Dark Prince, hear me. I do this for you as much as for myself. Let this night be the grandest of symphonies. Fill me with your inspiration and ecstasy. Feast on our offering, and in return, grant me the beauty and perfection in art that I've sought. My voice trembled with emotion. Let none who witness this forget it, if they live to remember. Let my music be etched upon the fabric of reality itself. As I spoke, I felt a curious warmth coil around my shoulders, like the lightest touch of an unseen hand. It might have been imagination or the draft from a vent, but I chose to believe it was a sign that Slaanesh listened and was pleased. A discreet knock came at the door. It was Lyrian, the tenor. Maestro, he said, using the honorific title they'd all started calling me. It's time. The guests are arriving. I exhaled and nodded. This was it. Showtime. Before leaving the dressing room, I slid open a drawer and retrieved one more item. Sister Dominica's rosary, which I had unconsciously pocketed after her fall and discovered later in my coat. I had kept it as a strange memento. The small wooden beads and tiny Aquila icon had long ceased to hold spiritual meaning for me, but tonight I decided I would carry it. Not as a plea for her forgiveness, I doubted that would ever come, but as a reminder of how far I'd come and what I'd left behind. I curled the rosary tight in my fist until the edges bit into my skin. The pain steadied me in the way a strict conductor's glare once might have. Then I tossed it aside on the table. I didn't need steadying anymore. I was ready to conduct the end of this charade and the beginning of something transcendent. Squaring my shoulders, I stepped out and followed Lyrian through the corridors towards the grand auditorium, where destiny and an unsuspecting audience awaited the opening note of the Threnody of the Empyrean. The auditorium was filling with a peculiar hush. From behind the tattered velvet curtains of the stage, I peered out at the assembled guests. About 50 or 60 in all, seated in the refurbished front rows or milling about on the floor which had been cleared for more interactive participation. Some were our fellow cultists in disguise, scattered to guide events if needed. Others were outsiders, many dressed in their noble finery, faces masked or veiled as if attending a clandestine masquerade. There was an air of anticipation, curiosity, and underlying debauchery. Goblets of drug-laced wine had been provided, and a sweet haze of narcotic incense already hung in the air, courtesy of braziers in the corners. I spotted a few figures that gave me pause, stern-looking men in plainer clothes trying to blend in, likely undercover arbites or enforcers. They held drinks, but barely sipped, eyes scanning watchfully. One exchanged a nod with someone in the balcony. By the cut of that silhouette, I suspected an inquisitorial agent. It didn't matter now. They were flies who had entered the spider's lair thinking themselves hunters. In a matter of minutes, none of their precautions would mean a thing. Our orchestra was in position on the stage, partially obscured behind a scrim of translucent fabric that gave only impressions of their shapes. This was intentional to draw focus to the sound and to me when I emerged. I could barely make out Varius at his station with his bone violin, the tech priest adjusting a Vox amplifier one last time, Lyrian and the other choristers standing at the ready in their pale robes marked with Slaanesh symbols hidden under swirling patterns. My own heart was surprisingly calm, beating in a steady, assertive rhythm. A far cry from the jitters I used to feel before a simple chapel recital. Perhaps it was the mark on me lending unnatural composure, or the absolute certainty that what we were about to do was right, in the sense that it fulfilled every purpose I now lived for. Fear had no place here. This was destiny. The lights, what few there were, mostly candles and a couple of flickering lumen strips rigged by our tech priest, dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. I heard a few whispers. What sort of performance is this? Is this some new opera? And one voice, slurred by intoxication, giggling, I heard this lot are wicked freaks. This should be fun. In that moment, I allowed myself a tight smile. Fun. If only they knew. With a subtle hand signal, I cued the introductory measure. From the darkness, a lone note from Varius's violin rang out, long, haunting, setting the tone. The conversation in the hall died completely. Another instrument joined. The soft thump of a single drum, a heartbeat in the void. Then I stepped forward, through the curtain, into a single beam of purple-tinged spotlight. The tech priest swung onto center stage. A collective gasp rustled through the audience as they beheld me. I must have been a sight, tall and otherworldly in my exquisite attire, face half-painted, the symbol on my brow glowing faintly. The warpstone pigments we used made sure of that. I swept an elaborate bow, one arm across my chest. Welcome, I said in a voice that carried eerily well, thanks to the hall's acoustics and perhaps a touch of warp aid. Tonight, I present to you a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the threnody of the Empyrean. I straightened and cast a knowing glance around, meeting eyes hidden behind masks and veils. Listen and be transformed. With that, I turned my back on the crowd to face my orchestra and raised my hands. They all watched me intently. Not a sheet of music in sight, for we'd memorized everything. My fingers splayed, trembling with contained energy. There was a perfect pregnant silence, the audience holding breath, my musicians poised. A silence like the moment before a lightning strike. I brought down my hands and the first movement began. Sound erupted, yet softly at first, a gentle swirl of strings and keys. The music was beautiful in a conventional way initially, a plaintive melody that one might hear in a tragedy's love scene. I saw some guests smile, pleasantly surprised, relaxing. This lulled them. Within those first minutes, we already started weaving the spells. The notes were arranged to form subtle harmonics that resonated with the warp-touched crystals on stage. You couldn't hear that resonance consciously, but I knew it was working when the front row's expressions turned from polite interest to dreamy captivation. As the melody developed, I let it repeat and evolve, layering in more instruments. The drumbeat of that single heart persisted beneath, symbolic of a mortal life's steady thrum. It was mesmerizing, if I say so myself. I even closed my own eyes for a moment as I conducted, allowing the music to carry me as much as I carried it. In the audience, I heard soft gasps, sighs of contentment. People were shifting in their seats, leaning closer to the stage as if drawn forward physically by the sound. A few touched their faces or chests, experiencing personal emotions, some likely recalling lost loves or bittersweet memories the tune evoked. Yes, I thought, feel it. Our choir began to hum now, their voices blending in eerie chordal harmony beneath the instruments. This was the lead-in to the second movement. where things would begin to turn. Gradually, the music's tone shifted. What started as mournful and sweet began to acquire dissonance. A wrong-sounding note here, a chord that didn't resolve there, subtle, woven in carefully so as to almost go unnoticed consciously. Yet the mood in the room changed. People furrowed brows, uncertain why the music made them uneasy now. The melody was still there, but twisted, like a lovely face contorted by anguish or ecstasy. I gave a nod, and one of the stagehands tossed a pinch of special powder into the braziers. A new scent wafted out, an aphrodisiac vapor. At the same time, our lighting man slowly adjusted colored filters, bathing the stage in alternating washes of blue and pink, Slaanesh's sacred hues. The interplay of light and smell and sound formed a tapestry of stimulus that began to overwhelm the senses of our dear guests. I saw one lady in a feathered hat giggling uncontrollably, running her hands up her own arms as if the air itself caressed her. A gentleman beside her had tears streaming down his cheeks, mouth agape in awe. A pair of formerly composed undercover Arbites now looked at each other in confusion. One was sweating heavily, loosening his collar as if flush with sudden heat. The other blinked slowly, caught in a stupor of arousal or bliss. We entered the second movement fully now. The drumbeat picked up slightly. The heart quickens. The strings played frenetic runs, high and nerve-jangling. This was the tension phase, the music of mounting anticipation and growing discord. Lyrian stepped forward and began the first vocal solo, singing actual lyrics now, the ancient dark verses. He sang in a rich tenor, words of longing and promise in some long-forgotten tongue. To the audience, it probably sounded like operatic gibberish, but those syllables carried power. With each phrase, I felt a ripple in the air as if reality flexed gently. Some listeners cried out, a few in pain, most in rapture. The sound was affecting them deeply. One middle-aged noble tore open the high collar of his shirt, gasping as though he couldn't breathe until his skin felt the open air. A woman in the back fainted outright, slipping from her seat. She was soon trampled inadvertently by others who stood unconsciously swaying to the music. Then came the third movement, the orgy of sound, I called it. I threw my arms wide, and our previously measured performance exploded into manic intensity. All at once, the choir burst into a cacophony of ecstatic harmony, moans and chants intermingled. The percussionists unleashed a wild tribal rhythm that reverberated in the pit of the stomach. The violin and cello screeched in high-pitched unity that was almost agonizing yet thrilling to hear. The effect on the audience was immediate and visceral. People began to laugh, to scream, to weep without knowing why. A collective madness seized them, one carefully orchestrated by yours truly. Many stood up, reaching out as if to grasp the notes out of the air. Some grabbed the nearest person and embraced or kissed or clawed, driven by sudden overwhelming urges. Decorum was utterly lost. Masks fell away from sweat-slick faces. I saw a young aristocrat rip the jeweled brooch from her dress and stab it into her own thigh, face alight with euphoric delirium. She likely felt no pain as blood trickled down her leg. In the midst of this escalating chaos, I too felt an immense pressure building, a vibration in my bones. The warp was listening and responding. The stage around me began to shimmer at the edges of vision. I heard strange undertones in our music now, tones none of us were actually playing. Whispers, bells, low thrumming laughs, as if an invisible ensemble from beyond had joined in. Yes, come on. I willed it, my eyes stinging from the concentration and incense. The fourth movement approached, the summoning. I glanced at Sirius, who stood off to the side, overseeing with a rapt expression. He gave me a single nod, the final go-ahead. I raised both hands high, signaling a sudden stop. The orchestra cut off as one. The abrupt silence was jarring. The audience, many of whom were in the midst of mania, gasped or wailed at the loss of sound, as if a drug had been snatched away. Into that silence, Lyrian began to sing solo once more, this time the true invocation. The words were foul and beautiful all at once. Low Gothic gave way to high, then descended into the black speech of chaos. With each alien syllable that rolled off his tongue, the air grew thicker, heavier. He sang of opening gates, of welcoming the Dark Prince's embrace, of inviting the unseen audience beyond the veil to join our revel. Behind him, almost imperceptible at first, a circular symbol on the floor, drawn in special luminescent ink, began to glow bright purple. I heard a distinct crack in the distance, like a thunderclap underwater. Some in the crowd fell to their knees, clutching their heads as the warp pressure mounted. I resumed conducting, softly now, guiding the final instrumental undercurrent to Lyrian's summoning song. A low, repeating chord progression on the organ, a deep thrumming bass from our Vox amplifiers, like the sound of a colossal door creaking open far away. Then, reality split. It started as a flicker of light at the center of the glowing sigil. Then a tear, a literal gash in the fabric of the air, appeared. Gasps of awe and terror rang out. To the audience, it might have looked like a dazzling special effect, but we on stage knew it was far more. I felt its presence like an icy hot wind, blowing from nowhere and everywhere at once. The portal widened, swirling with opalescent colors and black tendrils of nothingness. From that breach spilled creatures, lithe, inhumanly graceful, horrifying and enthralling. Daemonettes of Slaanesh. The first one emerged, crawling on all fours, yet unnaturally elegant, its skin a pale lavender hue, eyes huge and black and hungry. Claws like scythes tipped its slender arms, and a crown of horns adorned its oddly beautiful alien face. More followed, half a dozen in total, just as I dreamt. 6 shapes prancing onto the mortal stage. They giggled and shrieked in pitches that harmonized eerily with our music. A few audience members screamed in true fear at the sight, trying to back away, but many more roared in delirious approval or fell into ecstatic prostration. The line between spectator and participant was fully obliterated now. We had not just broken the audience, we had broken the boundary of reality for them. The Daemonettes wasted no time. They twirled into the throng, moving faster than human eyes could follow, and the slaughter, or should I say performance, began in earnest. One leapt onto an overdressed baroness, caressing the woman's cheek tenderly before ripping her throat out in a spray of blood, all in one fluid motion like a deadly dance. Another circled 2 men who were locked in a senseless embrace from the music's influence, and with a delighted laugh, she decapitated them both with a single wide sweep of her claws. Their heads rolled away, still wearing expressions of rapturous bliss. Yet, bizarrely, the overall atmosphere did not immediately shift to panicked horror. The music and warp taint dulled the crowd's self-preservation. Some saw their fellows being torn apart and started applauding as if it were part of the show, even as gore splattered their gowns. Others, deep in narcotic or chaotic trance, reached out to the demons with yearning, only to be taken up in lethal dances. One young man actually cried out, "So beautiful," as a daemonette impaled him through the chest, shuddering in what looked disturbingly like pleasure as he died. All the while we played on, the symphony reaching its apex. I conducted like a man possessed, for truly perhaps I was. I felt a colossal presence loom at the edges of my mind, like an audience behind the curtain of reality observing through the eyes of its minions. The Dark Prince was watching. My own senses were ablaze, the scent of blood and perfume, the screams and chords intermingling, the visions of ecstasy and agony before me. It was overwhelming, and yet I had never felt so alive, so godlike. I laughed, I cried simultaneously, directing the chaos in time with each crescendo. This was it, the moment of culmination. My entire life had been but a prelude to this grand collision of art and atrocity. Suddenly, over the cacophony, a new sound rang out, one that was not of our making. Gunfire. A sharp crack, crack, and an instant later one of my violinists, a cultist named Marion, jerked and fell, half her face blown away by a sniper's round. From the balcony boxes came shouting. The Inquisition had decided to make their move, likely thinking now was the time to stop whatever heresy was transpiring. They were late, far too late, but armed nonetheless. Bright muzzle flashes lit the gloom as a squad of armsmen opened fire into the crowd, not caring that they hit innocent nobles along with cultists. Perhaps in their eyes all present were already lost. The boom of a shotgun sounded as an Arbeits officer on the ground floor blasted a charging demonette, sending the lithe creature reeling with half its chest blown open, only for the demon to straighten a moment later, unfazed by wounds that would kill a mortal, and pounce on him with a shriek. I grit my teeth in annoyance. They threatened to disrupt my magnum opus before its finale. I would not allow it. "Keep playing," I screamed to my performers, my voice cutting through the din like a razor. A few had faltered at the sudden gunfire, but at my command they pressed on, redoubling their fervor. The choir's voices turned to a keening wail, matching the demonette's own ululations. The strings took up a furious ostinato, defiant and aggressive. I adapted on the fly, conducting now not only the musicians, but the violence itself. Each staccato note seemed to coincide with a gunshot, each swell of melody with a wave of pandemonium across the hall. I hopped down off the podium, striding to the very lip of the stage to face the encroaching enforcers. A stubber round whizzed past my ear, another clanged off an amplifier behind me. I felt no fear, only fury that these fools would try to silence me. With dramatic flair, I reached into a hidden compartment of the stage prop near me and pulled out an item we had prepared, a sonic weapon fashioned in the shape of a lute. It was a crude imitation of the Noise Marine's instruments of destruction, built by our tech priest from scavenged parts and empowered by the warp energies now saturating the place. I strummed its strings hard, and a visible ripple of compressed sound blasted forth. The shockwave hit an Arbeits firing line that was advancing down the aisle. It liquefied the closest man instantly, his body bursting into a red mist. The others were thrown back, ears and eyes bleeding from the concussive force. I laughed, a wild cackle of triumph, and played another discordant chord on the hellish lute. Glass shattered across the auditorium from the sonic wave. An inquisitorial trooper on the balcony doubled over, blood spurting from his mouth as the vibrations ruptured his organs. The remaining arbitrators, to their credit, didn't flee. Fanatically, they pushed forward, firing at me. I felt a bullet punch into my left shoulder, a flare of pain. But with the symphony coursing through me, it registered as distant, irrelevant. Shards of plaster rained as another shot grazed past my hip. But before they could take better aim, a demonette dropped onto them from above, bisecting two soldiers with one sweep of her claws. Her laughing and their screams perfectly accented a particularly high note from our soprano. I turned to see how the rest of the hall fared. It was absolute bedlam. Bodies littered the floor, both the exalted and the hapless. Some cultists who had no weapons tore at unarmed nobles with bare hands, driven to frenzied bloodlust by the ritual's peak. A few surviving guests huddled against walls, eyes blank or delusional, as if trying to wake from a nightmare but unable to escape the waking dream we'd cast. And at the center, the demonettes danced amid entrails and flames. A pew had caught fire somehow, adding flickering orange light to the kaleidoscope of colors. And over all of it soared our music, undiminished. In fact, it reached a new height of dreadful perfection when one of our chaotic amplifiers, struck by a stray bullet, began to shriek with feedback. Rather than silence it, our organist modulated his chords to harmonize with that shrill keening, turning potential disruption into a chilling enhancement of the soundscape. I saw Sirius on the sidelines, his face ecstatic, blood spattered and eyes reflecting all the carnage like jewels. He caught my gaze and mouthed something, perhaps glory or victory. I couldn't be sure, but his expression said it all. We had done it. No matter what happened next, we had achieved the sublime. The portal still shimmered on stage, though no more demons emerged for now. The 6 cavorting were handling things well enough, but it meant the veil remained thin. I sensed shapes beyond it, hungry silhouettes held at bay for now by the limits of our ritual and perhaps by Slaanesh's own decree. 6 was the number after all. The raw energy pouring through was saturating everything. I could feel it coursing under my skin, a tingling elation. As the final pages of the symphony approached, I wanted to savor every last instant. I clambered back onto the stage, a bit unsteadily, blood loss from my wound catching up slightly, though I felt no pain, only wet warmth down my arm. Lyrian, incredibly, was still singing, though his white robe was now crimson in places from the blood that had splashed him. He gave me a feral grin as he sustained a high note that by all rights should have shattered his vocal cords. Perhaps it did, but he kept singing anyway, eyes glowing with zeal. I raised my hand for the final cue, the coda that would close the threnody. The few remaining instrumentalists gathered their last reserves of strength. This would be the climax to seal all that happened, whether to gently close the portal or to detonate our minds in one last burst. I wasn't entirely sure, but it was going to be magnificent. I gave the downbeat. Our last chord struck, a towering dissonant E minor major chord, the two extremes of sorrow and joy intertwined. The choir let out a final sustained cry, half exultation, half agony. I felt the note reverberate not just in the air, but deep in the warp. The fabric of reality trembled. The daemonettes all arched their backs and screamed in unison, a sound uncannily akin to an orgasmic release. Many of the still living humans in the hall did likewise, whether out of pain or ecstasy, or both. It was impossible to tell. The very walls of the opera house quaked. Dust rained from the ceiling. For a moment, all was frozen in that single, universe-piercing chord. Then I whipped my arm to cut off. Silence fell, true silence, as if the world itself went deaf for a heartbeat in awe. The portal on stage imploded with a concussive thump, signaling the ritual's end. The daemonettes, no longer sustained by the summoning, winked out of existence one by one, blowing farewell kisses or bowing theatrically as they vanished back into the immaterium. All that remained was the aftermath, and me standing at center stage, chest heaving, soaked in sweat and others' blood, one arm still raised dramatically in conducting pose. Then the silence was broken by a slow, delirious clap. From somewhere in the carnage, a lone surviving noble, face half-burned, likely insane, was applauding me, a rictus grin on his face. He continued, joined improbably by Sirius, who stumbled forward and likewise began to clap, tears streaming down his cheeks in joy. The few cultists still conscious took it up too, a ragged, surreal round of applause echoing in the ruined hall. I couldn't help it. I threw my head back and laughed. A pure, triumphant laugh that rang through the air. I had done it. By the Dark Prince, I had done it. No audience in history had witnessed what these wretches had tonight. No composer had ever shaped raw chaos into melody like this and lived to feel the applause. I drank it in, every uneven clap and sobbed cheer, letting it wash over me in vindication. But the night was not quite done with its twists. From the shadowed debris near the entrance, a figure emerged limping. An inquisitor. It had to be, by the authoritative way he stood despite his injuries. His carapace armor was dented, a chunk missing from his side, and blood spattered his coat, but his eyes burned with righteous hatred. In one hand he raised a bolt pistol. "Blasphemer!" he roared, voice rasping but fervent. "In the God Emperor's name, die!" He fired. A bolt shell hurtled toward me, a streak of death. In that instant, perhaps spurred by instinct or by Slaanesh's last gift, I reacted with uncanny speed. I snatched up a cymbal from the percussion set next to me and held it as a shield. The bolter round hit it dead center. The impact was tremendous, the cymbal crumpling, but it absorbed enough that the shell didn't detonate on me. I was flung back, though, the shockwave numbing my arm and shattering a few teeth from the concussive force. I fell hard, the wind knocked from my lungs. The Inquisitor advanced, determination in every step, raising the pistol again. My ears rang. I struggled to focus. Time seemed to slow as I watched him draw nearer amidst the corpses and rubble of what had once been an auditorium of art. Strangely, I felt no fear. I realized in that crystal moment that our symphony had done more than summon daemons and enthrall mortals. It had marked all who participated, myself included, forever. If I were to die here by an Inquisitor's hand, so be it. My magnum opus was complete, and nothing would erase that. I had achieved what I set out to do. No more, something beyond mortal achievement. In the warp, the ripples of my threnody would reverberate for eternity. The Inquisitor loomed over me, taking aim for a final shot at my head. I saw his face, young for an Inquisitor, eyes wild, lip curled in disgust. Perhaps he had even enjoyed some of the performance before remembering his duty. We locked gazes, my defiant grin meeting his snarl. He hesitated a fraction, maybe surprised I could still smile at him. I used that moment. Summoning one last reserve of strength, I opened my bloody mouth and sang. Not a long phrase, just a short melody. 4 notes of an old imperial hymn, twisted into a mocking inversion that carried a faint warp echo behind it. The Inquisitor flinched. Perhaps the sudden sound, or the warp in it, startled him. His pistol wavered. He pulled the trigger, but the shot went wide, exploding against the stage floor inches from me, showering me with splinters. Before he could correct aim, a form lunged at him from the side, Sirius, tackling the Inquisitor with a feral shout. They went down hard. Sirius, never a fighter, was outmatched, but he delayed the man for precious seconds, grappling for the gun. I staggered to my feet, adrenaline surging one final time. On the edge of the stage lay Varius's violin. Its strings snapped, but the body intact. I snatched it up, holding it like a dagger. With a wordless cry, I hurled myself at the struggling pair. The Inquisitor threw Sirius off and was rising when I thrust the sharp, broken neck of the violin into his throat with all my remaining strength. He gurgled, eyes bulging in shock as wood and bone, for that violin, I recall, had a fragment of human bone in its construction, pierced through flesh and out the back of his neck. We locked eyes again, this time with him the stunned one. I leaned in, face only inches from his, and whispered, "Encore, my lord." Then I twisted the impaled instrument. His neck gave a sickening crack and tear. The great Inquisitor fell lifeless at my feet, blood pouring over the violin's ruined frame. Sirius coughed nearby, wounded but alive. I extended a hand and helped him up. We surveyed the scene. The Inquisitor's death seemed to break the last hold of duty on any surviving minions. The few remaining Arbites, wounded and dazed, turned and fled into the night, unwilling to continue this doomed battle. It was over. Really, truly over. A handful of us remained standing in that hall of horrors. Me, Sirius, Selene, limping out from behind an overturned pew, her gown torn but a look of pure ecstasy on her face. Lyrian, somehow still alive, though half the flesh of his face had been flensed by a daemonette's caress. He smiled through the gore as if proud of his scars, and maybe 2 or 3 others, cultists or guests. It was hard to be sure. The silence after chaos was deafening. Only the crackle of that one pew still burning, and the occasional whimper of a dying soul echoed in the rafters. The air was thick with the coppery smell of blood and the cloying sweetness of Slaanesh incense. My injuries began to catch up. The bullet wound in my shoulder throbbed. The bruises and cuts made themselves known. Exhaustion like I'd never known began to wash over me. And yet I felt incredible, on top of the world. A high, greater than any drug or thrill could provide, coursed through me. I walked back to center stage, near the collapsed portal site, stepping over the Inquisitor's corpse and many others. I stood among the carnage and remaining followers. Slowly, I raised my arms one final time as if to conduct once more. "Thus ends the performance," I announced softly, voice somehow carrying to every corner of that deathly still chamber. "Our thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Our thanks." Then I gave a deep, graceful bow as the curtainless stage allowed the slaughterhouse of an auditorium to witness. Blood dripped from my sleeves as I bent, pooling at my feet. When I straightened, no applause came this time, only the dripping of blood and crackle of embers. But it was perfect. A perfect ending punctuated by silence, as all great performances eventually are. Sirius, face shining with admiration and dark victory, hobbled over and placed a hand on my arm. "We should leave," he said gently. In the distance, I could already hear faint alarms, perhaps distant enforcer sirens or just the ringing in my ears. The authorities would likely regroup and come with heavier forces once they recovered. Staying here was suicide, even though part of me was tempted to just lie down amidst the ruin, cradling the nearest dead daemonette like a lover, and let whatever came next come. But no, we had more to do, perhaps, more to share with the galaxy. I nodded to him. Selene came to my other side, sliding her arm around my waist to support me, or perhaps to simply be close to me. She looked up at me like one looks at a living saint. "Where to now, maestro?" she asked in a playful tone, as if we hadn't just toppled civilization in microcosm here. I considered. The Inquisition would surely mark this world after tonight. Maybe even declare exterminatus if they deemed it too far gone. And by some accounts, what we unleashed might have lasting effects. That portal could have subtly tainted the area permanently. We would need to flee Gina Prime, that was certain. Into the Eye of Terror? To another world to spread our art? That was for later. For now, I allowed myself a final look over the only home I had known, now transformed by my hand into something unrecognizable. The once upright pillars and polished seats of the opera were smeared in viscera and filth. The holy and profane mingled indistinguishably. It was hideous. It was glorious. My gaze fell upon a broken marble statue at the corner of the stage, a figure of the Emperor that had long stood overlooking performances here, back when this house was a legitimate venue. In the chaos, it had toppled and shattered. Only the head remained intact, staring blankly amid rubble. I stepped over and gently nudged that stony head with the tip of my boot, sending it rolling off the stage into a puddle of blood below. A fitting final gesture. "Anywhere but here," I finally answered Celine, a touch of ironic lightness in my tone. "We have a whole galaxy full of unsung songs to explore." And with that, we turned and left through the rear, disappearing into the smoke-laden night. A small cadre of the damned slinking away from our grand masterpiece. Behind us, the screams had faded, but the echoes of my music, our music, surely lingered in those ruins. I walked onward, wounded, yes, and forever changed, but unbowed. The imperial musician I once was had died on that stage tonight as surely as any of the victims. In his place stood a chosen herald of Slaanesh, a master of a new order of creation and destruction entwined. As we slipped into the labyrinth of the Underhive's dark alleys, I hummed the opening notes of the Threnody of the Empyrean under my breath. Celine hummed along beside me, leaning her head on my shoulder. Sirius chuckled quietly, the sound one of pure contentment. Though we were drenched in blood and fleeing for our lives, in that moment I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment, of rightness. I had given the galaxy a gift tonight in my own twisted way. Those who survived would never forget it, and those who perished had been granted an end unlike any other. And as for me, I had been freed of fear, of restraint, of remorse. All that remained was the music and the craving for the next high note, the next boundary to shatter. We vanished into the depths of the hive, a triumphant requiem echoing in our hearts as sirens wailed distantly above. The night of my ascension was over, but the dawn of my new life as a Slaanesh cultist had only just begun.